Welcome back to Ernie's tennis channel. So today I wanted to talk about one of the great forgotten players in tennis history that will probably only get more obscure as time goes on, and that is Justine Henin on the women's tour. Now, Henin's a great player. She has a very unique and artistic game compared to a lot of the more straightforward power baseline ralliers that we see now. And I really just want to show the younger generation or people that may not have started watching tennis until 2010 really how great this player was and what she could have done had she not retired at age 27. So keep in mind when you're analyzing the legacy of Justine Henin that right as she was becoming the dominant player on tour, she decided to step away from the game of tennis and then came back in 2010 for a brief time before retiring once again. So the first thing that jumps out about Justine Henin is when you look at the list of Grand Slam winners between 2000 and 2010, you have Serena Williams capturing 10 titles, and then right behind her are Justine Henin and Venus Williams. Now, between Henin and Williams, I think Henin's a superior player. Henin had a much more unique and versatile game. And in addition, as the decade went along, Henin kept, rising while Venus Williams, outside of dominating Wimbledon, never really had the consistent dominance at other tournaments. When you look at Henin's career, 2002, she starts getting into the top 5. 2003, she becomes the world #1. 2006, she makes all 4 Grand Slam finals. And then in 2007, she's probably the most dominant single year for a women's player outside of some years that Serena's put together. So between 2010 to 2020, this is a decade where Henin still would have been, young enough to be a dominant player. You have Serena dominating the competition with 12 slams. The second group of players are going to be tied with 3. You have Kerber, Clijsters, Azarenka, and Sharapova. And while Sharapova did get the better of Henin, later in Henin's career, 2007, 2008, I really believe Henin was a far superior player to Sharapova. Sharapova, for moments, would get in the zone and look unbeatable, but overall, Henin was a much more consistent, much more well-rounded player. So again, my argument here is not that Henin was the best player of her generation. Serena Williams is clearly the greatest women's tennis player of all time. And if you're going to talk about a career, she's probably the greatest tennis player, period, that's ever lived. Now, here's the thing. When you look at the career from 1999 to 2007, was Serena that much better than Henin? I don't really know about that. How many times would they have played in the last 10 years if Henin was still on tour? The biggest criticism that the female tour gets is that there's too many players and there's not really enough dominant ones for us to latch on to anyone. That's why Serena's so popular. On the men's tour, you have 4 or 5 guys that you can identify as, slam threats at any time. Whereas on the women's tour, there's just a rotating cycle of #1s that have never won a slam, that are good players that could win in any given week, but there's just no consistency, and it doesn't really allow the tennis fans to latch on to any particular personality. Well, when Henin and Serena Williams and then even Sharapova were playing between 2000 and 2010, you got that element from women's tennis. And that's something I'd like to see come back, that I think it will when you have players like Osaka that have entered the picture. I really like Ashley Barty and Andreescu too, and I think they'll be around for a long time. So again, Henin is the forgotten player of the generation. Between 2003 to 2007, those 4 years alone, she was the best player on tour. She was the most accomplished. She won the most. Her and Federer kind of had their peaks aligned perfectly, which is ironic because they pretty much played the exact same style. And that's really what I'm going to miss the most about Justine Henin. Her one-handed backhand, the slice, her ability to volley. She has much more versatility than any of the players I see on tour right now. There's no doubt that Serena's up here in a class by herself, but to be honest, I think Henin's in a class by herself as a #2, and the gap between even Henin and the 3rd best player of the last 20 years is massive. If you look at the last 30 years, I would put Serena #1, Steffi Graf as the 2nd, and then I would honestly put Henin as 3rd. I think she's a better player than Monica Seles. So there you go. You have a player here that may have been the 3rd best player of a 30-year span. And I know in 2050, when you have players that are looking back on the women's game, she's really not going to be in the mix because she's not going to have enough slams to appear on the algorithms when you look on Wikipedia, who's won the most slams. But for a very brief time, between 2002 to 2007, and probably, would have continued on into 2015 and maybe even today in 2020, Justine Henin was the second best player in the world, and she probably would have retired with between 13 and 18 Grand Slams had she continued to play. She had, I guess, marriage issues, which were a big reason why she lost focus her first go around. And she's just in general one of these people that doesn't need professional success at the tennis level to be happy. I could see her kind of just like chilling by a fireplace with her dog reading a book, and that's what, makes her happy. So, kind of an old soul, very mature game. She plays more like a men's tennis player than she does a women's tennis player. She's only 5'5", so it was awesome to see her go head-to-head against some of the bigger players on tour. But I really think her game would have aged well, especially the lack of nuance that I see in today's players. I think Justine Henin would have been extremely hard for these players to beat and handle, a player with the intelligence and the variety that she has. So Justine Henin, my case for her as the second best player of her generation, and a player that's going to be truly great and maybe forgotten in the long-term perspective of tennis history. I highly recommend you watch some of her matches in the mid-2000s, and you just see what a special player she is and what we're forgetting because she's not around anymore. I really wish she was still on women's tour. I would have loved to see her play. I like Henin almost as much as I like Djokovic in terms of my favorite players to watch. And again, go check out her videos online. Have a great day.